Welcome to Speaking on Tongues, Confessions of the Radically Saved, my panel. I'm so excited to do this. When I started this residency, I had this idea of 3 panels. Like, I'll do one on transracial adoption, I'll do one on Black identity terminology, I'll do one on like ex-evangelicalism. And when I thought about my dream guests, I was like, well, I'll never get like stars, I say stars and you guys both are like, oh, but at the same time, both of you came in and knew how to work the crowd. You walked around and talked to everyone. And I just sat here, this is kind of my first time in a public, facing position where I'm all stiff. I'm like, okay, I'll just sit and wait. And then you're like, hello, welcome. And then you came in just like, hi, because, so I should explain who you are for anybody that doesn't know, but I imagine everybody does. I'm going to start over here. Tara Teng, welcome. Tara is a writer and embodiment coach who helps people heal trauma and dismantle purity culture. She is also a TEDx speaker, a former Miss Canada, and one of the Globe and Mail's top 25 most transformational Canadians. Teng received the Queen's Diamond Jubilee Medal for her advocacy work, which advanced the socioeconomic status of women. I'm just really excited. Her first book, Your Body is a Revolution, Healing Our Relationships with Our Bodies, Each Other, and the Earth, is forthcoming from Broadleaf Books in May 2023. Tara Teng. And I'll get to you in a moment, but first, tell me about this book. I mean, it's finished, right?
Yeah,
it's
finished.
In the can.
Yeah, I'm just waiting for the physical copies to come back for the print.
Oh, you're waiting for your big box of books.
Yeah.
Oh,
it's so exciting.
So that really is.
I've been working on it for a couple years now. After years of you guys know, the personal work that goes into writing a book, and then there's the process of being a writer, actually putting it to paper. Digitally, of course, and you're sitting there going through the whole realm of I have all the ideas and great ideas, and then you're like, oh my God, other people should be writing this book and not me, and then you go through your own imposter syndrome, and you're all deep inner work of digging through all the stuff, and then hopefully, thanks to really great editors that help you out, you have something that you're really excited to share with the world, and hopefully you guys really love it, and then it helps you, and then it brings you on your own personal journey of going through all your own stuff as you discover that your bodies are so wise and so important, and that's not a narrative that we hear enough in our Western culture. We've been told, especially if you came from the church, the exact opposite, don't listen to your body. Your body is desperately wicked, and every institution around us has tried to commodify and monopolize on the body, have some sort of agenda on the body, that you don't listen to your own innate internal wisdom, because different institutions of power and authority want you to listen to them instead. And so the book, Your Body is a Revolution, is helping you unlearn and strip away all of those things and kind of take a step back and see all of the ways that the culture around us has shaped that relationship that we have with our bodies, and how that relationship with our bodies, when we can heal that, it also heals the relationship we have with each other, coming back to the relationship we have with the earth, all of that. It's all interconnected. And so that's what my book is about, and I really hope that you guys love it and that it changes your life somehow.
Ooh, exciting. Okay.
Yeah.
So then I'm excited to also introduce my next guest, because I feel like there's going to be an interesting interplay here. Josh Harris is an American former evangelical Christian pastor.
Soon to be Canadian.
Hey, look at that. Citizenship. Harris's 1997 book, I Kissed Dating Goodbye, helped shape purity culture for many Christian millennials. Harris was lead pastor of Covenant Life Church in Maryland from 2004 until 2015. In 2018, Harris disavowed I Kissed Dating Goodbye and discontinued its publication. The following year, Harris announced that he had undergone a massive shift in regard to my faith in Jesus and had given up on his Christian faith. Does that bio represent?
Not bad.
Not bad?
Yeah.
Let's welcome Josh Harris. Yeah, that's a pretty... very compelling bio. Can you tell me, you wrote a book. Actually, your book, you sold a lot more copies than my book, and I probably, our books combined are not going to sell what your book sold. and then you unpublished it. So does that mean that I'm ahead of you in sales now? Like,
Yeah, I'm an unpublished author for sure.
what is the process of unpublishing? Like, how does that work?
Well, I had a really supportive publisher, and we had a lot of conversations, and they really respected the change of perspective that I'd gone through. And so when we talked through that, they said, you know what, we want to support you and honor what you're doing. And so they just stopped printing the book.
Wow.
So, yeah.
I mean, do you still get royalties?
No, unfortunately, no royalties.
Oh,
that's
man.
that's part of the deal.
That's too bad. Okay, well, so what excites me, I think, about this panel is that the three of us were like pretty deep in Christianity for a while. I mean, that might be to put it lightly. And now none of us are. Yeah, tell me where you're at in your relationship with Christ. This is language.
Wow.
This is language I have not
So
used.
testimony time, guys.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, like honestly, so like I haven't used language like that in so long. I was talking to my partner about this event, and I was like, oh man, like you won't believe it. Like I get to talk to Josh Harris. She was like, who is that? No, like this is a really big deal. And then she Googled it and was like, what is that? Like I'm not interested. So I'm out of practice, but I know that that's a question I got asked a lot.
Yeah.
How's your heart? And tell me about your relationship with the Lord.
Yeah, I mean, if we're isolating just Jesus, I still really love the teachings of Jesus, like the teachings on nonviolence, how inclusive he was, how like radical he was to like the whole like establishment of religion and this hierarchy at the time. He was like very countercultural. And so I like that aspect of Jesus still. I no longer call myself a Christian. I no longer associate with the church as I at least knew it. I know there's a lot of different denominations within the church. And so maybe somebody out there has found a great one that they really love. Sure, that's awesome. But overall, my experience of the church was very patriarchal, was very white dominated, was not queer friendly, did not have women in leadership. And so the values and ethics that I hold no longer align with that. And I have seen so many scandals and just things that I can't be a part of. So I left the church a number of years ago. It's been like a long process because I think like I was a pastor's kid. I grew up in a small town church. I was homeschooled, like all the things.
Whoa. Josh, were you also homeschooled?
I was homeschooled my whole life.
So was I.
Homeschool high five.
Yeah. That's because there's no one else to high five. That's why you do it to yourself. Tell me about your homeschool experience. What was that like?
Yeah, my dad was a really big homeschool teacher. So when I started, it was still in the States. It was still slightly illegal. So my mom would always say, "Don't go outside until 3:00," and that kind of thing. Yeah, yeah. So I homeschooled my whole life, but then it was more than just that. It was also, my dad would travel around the country and teach on homeschooling. So it was really a big part of our family identity. And
yeah, I feel like when I was introduced to I Kissed Dating Goodbye, you were just kind of held up as like an authority figure. And if somebody had been like, hey, bro, he was homeschooled, that would have just taken such a weight off for me because I would have been like, he doesn't know any more than I know. Like, no, you can't listen to him. Like, we're looking for people who have been in the world. Like, let's go talk to somebody who's seen some stuff. But like, yeah, like you published your book when you were really young, right? You were 21, is that right?
Yeah.
Like, how did that happen? I wanted to get a book deal at 21, and I was not ready. Or good enough at writing books.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, my view of that book is informed by what I know now. So I don't think that I should have been given a book deal. I don't agree with what was in the book, but it was very specific to my circumstances. I was publishing a magazine for homeschool teens. This was before the internet, so I had an audience of people there. My dad had a small publishing company, so I would go to the big publishing conferences and get to know other publishers. And so when the time came and I did a book proposal and was sending it off to different companies, I had contacts that put things in front of people and so on. But Yeah, I mean, the age is, when I look back on it, it's like, it's so ridiculous that a 21-year-old is pontificating on these things. But it was also part of the appeal,
Yeah.
It's like every generation of religion loves when, someone young and really zealous gets up and says something that they want young people to believe. And so I really, believed those things myself and was trying to live those things. And I think that's part of why the book was the success it was, because there was a lot of frustration with dating, and here's a young guy that's saying these things. So,
what was your take on? No, I don't want to go to your take on the book. I want to go to what was your experience with I Kissed Dating Goodbye? Like, was it something that was taught in your youth group? Were you pressured to read it?
Yep.
Did you ever have the study guide?
I did not have the study guide.
I had the study guide.
oh God.
But I think the study guide many of us lived through youth group. I definitely was gifted the book from a family member. I think for me, my experience, like with the teachings of the book as one piece of purity culture as a whole, and just evangelicalism culture as a whole, because those kind of become synonymous with purity culture. It's so nuanced, right? And so my experience with it was not that it was necessarily always taught at church or youth groups, but it was all the extracurricular stuff that was taught and the messages that you got from just being in the environment and in the culture, right? Like, I remember very distinctly, I wasn't even a teenager yet. I was like 11 years old, and growing up having parents that were in the church leadership, and like our whole world was church, right? Like 4 days a week we were in the building itself, much less like any like home study groups that you had as well outside of that, right? Like our whole life was the church. And I remember being 11, and we're getting ready to do a church production for Palm Sunday. And this is probably bringing flashbacks for any of you who grew up similar to us, so I'm sorry for any trauma triggers that this might incite. And yet, we were there, and these moms pulled us girls aside who had been asked to do a dance for this production and stood us all in a line and inspected our clothing. And were our shoulders showing? Were our knees showing? Were like different parts of our body? Were the dance that we had been asked to choreograph, was it like safe enough for the boys in church? And I'm watching you all have very visceral responses to the story that I'm telling, because you probably have your own very similar stories to tell. And so that stuck with me. That was my first, before I even read your book, that was my first introduction to modesty culture and purity culture, and that other people could perceive my body as differently than I knew her and experienced my body to be. And that was just life-changing for me. That was such a different, like, it was the day everything started and changed for me and my relationship with my body and how other people interacted with my body.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's funny. Your book for me was like, I never read it because like it was a tool that my oppressors wanted to use to continue to oppress me. That was the main thing. And so I was talking to a friend of mine, and I said, I'm gonna be talking to you this Sunday. And he was like, "Are you gonna yell at him?" I was like, "Well, no, like, yeah,
okay.
like, sorry,
It's okay if you want to.
I'm not gonna yell at you. I'm gonna circle back because I bet people have, and I'd love to hear about that. But I felt like my family. I was adopted. I was this young black kid, like just coming into like his teenage years, and my family had this sense that because I was black, I was more like sexually immoral. And so, and it came up again and again and again. And, there was a pastor that just said it out loud. And this is all detailed in my book, which is for sale over there. And was recently named one of the Globe's 100 best books of the year.
I saw that. Congratulations.
Oh my God. Validation.
A little hug for little you. A little
yeah,
hug for little you.
I know.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, the point is that the pastor this one day had said, like we all descend from sinners, and those sins are still within us. The generational curse stuff. But then he started going kind of race by race. And, he was like, okay, so white people, like they descend from these people. And that's why they always want to be in charge, like ho, ho, ho. And then he was like, and black people descend from like Noah's son Ham, who assaulted his father after he was drunk. And that's why all black people are, predisposed to sexual sin. And I remember sitting in the church at the time, it was a church of like 100 people.
Oh my gosh.
And I was the only black person. And, nobody looked at me. But then the guy behind me like reached up and he touched my shoulder and he was like, you can beat this, man.
Oh.
Yeah. So then I got into my teen years and it just came up again and again. I'd want to go out and, my mom would say, well, you can't, like, you don't want to make the same mistake that your mom made, and then she would urge me to go to youth group, and we'd be doing the I Kiss Dating Goodbye study guide, and they would say, there's an example in the book where they would take a piece of Scotch tape and wrap it around their wrist, and then be like, this is, when you have sex with someone, it's like you do this, and then when you unwrap it, like, look, the tape is ruined, and so it was just this idea that, like, your worth, erodes over time, instead of just like continuing to like blossom and expand and grow and increase. And so I fought with your book. Like, you became a guy that I didn't know and had never read, but just was like, ooh, that Joshua Harris. And then I worked at a Christian bookstore when your second book came out. And I remember having to assemble the cardboard display for Boy Meets Girl, just like, I should wreck it. Like, I should rip it up. All of this is to say, I imagine that you have faced some, I'm going to say criticism, maybe loud criticism. Like, what's that been like for you?
Yeah, well, early on, sadly, I didn't engage with it and really listen. It's so easy to just filter through things and say, okay, people who are attacking me are haters. They don't love the Lord. They're not serious, that kind of thing. And the volume of response, I mean, nobody expected the books to sell the way they did. But the volume of response also just kind of overwhelms you, So you can find lots of people who support you and are saying you're doing the right thing, and then you just ignore it. And I actually remember at one point there was a book that was released. It was called Boundaries in Dating. It came out a few years after I Kiss Dating Goodbye. And because I Kiss Dating Goodbye had sort of shifted the conversation and made dating this, bad thing in the eyes of a lot of Christians, it had to respond to that, to talk about how to date in a healthy way. Right. And so there was a chapter or two that actually critiqued and was coming from like a biblical perspective, trying to show why the ideas in my book were wrong. And I remember being in Barnes & Noble and like reading this and being like, oh, wow. This kind of seems valid.
Oh, weird.
And I remember going to he was my mentor and pastor who was kind of training me to take his role down the road. And this is not to blame him, because I take responsibility for not engaging these critics earlier. But his response was like, you're being too sensitive to criticism. A strong leader really stands firm in conviction. And that's kind of the mindset when it came to all doctrine. And that was then applied to my book, which was, definitely not in the same category. But, that mindset of strong leaders don't listen to, the critics, basically. And so I sadly just went even longer in, defending the ideas in the book. So it wasn't until years later, really, when my church really had faced so much turmoil, and I, made huge mistakes as a pastor and was really disillusioned with myself, ended up coming to Vancouver to go to school at Regent. And that was the first setting where it's like I let go of the role. I was no longer trying to defend an institution or anything, and was a student. And that was the first time I actually started engaging with those critics. And they were fellow students who weren't angry in a vindictive way, but were honestly sharing, stories like Tara's sharing. And that's really what started to kind of soften my stance and go, I really need to listen to this, and I need to take this seriously, and I need to figure out what I should do about it.
Do you find, like, because for me, I think that if I was beginning to question a book that's successful, I would have a really hard time even feeling like I could acknowledge that publicly.
Yeah.
I think I'd be comfortable to just like fade away, and maybe nobody ever asks me any questions about whether or not I still believe the stuff in my book.
Yeah.
But you do have to continue to exist, and in some ways, like you're public now. So like I wonder what you thought about what people might say when you disavowed. I mean, your whole thing.
Yeah. Well, it was a long process, and it wasn't this like noble, you know what, I realize I'm wrong, I'm going to discontinue my book. It was a process of wrestling with things, having conversations, having so much fear about even disagreeing with the book, losing that, it was a huge part of my identity and sense of success. Like I wrote this book and it was, God led me to write it, and I was chosen to do this important work. And then to go back and say, no, this hurt people, and this was actually negative, and I need to step away from this. It was so hard for me to walk through that process. So it was hundreds of conversations and letters and interactions with people over a period of time that led ultimately to that place of saying, you know what, in light of all the things that I've seen that are negative, I can't continue to push this book out there and benefit from it and get royalties and so on, knowing that it has this damaging effect. And so but that took a long time.
Yeah.
And then it's true. It's like, even when I first started to question it, I got a lot of pushback from people who, loved the book and felt that I was attacking them. So it's a tricky thing. I mean, it helps me understand why it's so hard for people to change, who have been leaders and who have taught things or have written things. I think a lot of times in institutions, there's a tendency where if you see that something was wrong in the past, you just kind of distance yourself from it. You don't talk about it. It's very difficult to actually come out and say, hey, let's be specific about the things that we got wrong. But the problem is that all the people who were following and reading and listening, their life has been damaged or changed by that in a negative way. The leaders kind of move on and go, oh, well, yeah, that was in the past. But there are a lot of real lives that are negatively affected.
And if I may, Josh, and I've told you this in person as well too. Like, I respect the hell out of you that you have allowed us to publicly see even a glimpse into. I'm sure there's so much more that we haven't seen of your personal journey of grappling with this and wrestling with it, and stepping away and being like, holy shit, I was part of this harm, and you're acknowledging that harm. You've been very accountable to that, and you have stepped away and you have changed, and you've done something different. And I respect that, because that is so hard to do. In my own personal journey of deconstruction, of deconverting, of leaving the church, I've had to grapple with my own things. And I'm just so grateful I didn't put out a book when I was 19, because it would be very different. Like, I know the book that is coming out now is not what my mother was hoping for. So I respect that so much. And I need you to know that, you've heard me say that, and I think it's important to say that also publicly. Because I do have so much compassion for where you're at, and the journey, and how much courage, even just to be here today, how much courage it must take. And so I think that's important for you to hear.
Thank you.
And at the same time, because I do work with people every single day who are unraveling their own unlearning of some of the stuff that was taught in your book, and other places as well too, from other voices that were teaching purity culture and all the harmful ideas that we grew up with in evangelicalism. And that anger, wherever you're at in that unlearning journey, the anger or the resentment or the pain is valid. Yeah. It's valid for you. We can hold both things at the same time. We can be like, Josh, I'm so glad that you have been able to undo those things for yourself, and to be honest about the harm that was caused, and have the courage to face that harm and listen to people's criticism and say, I'm no longer perpetuating these harmful things. We can have that compassion for one person, and also at the time be so angry over what it did to us and grieve what we lost during those years of impurity culture. Those things can coexist at the same time. And so whatever journey you guys are at, and anybody who's watching this later, I honor the place that you're at today as well. And I hope that you find that liberation and healing for yourself as well too.
That's well said.
Yeah. Tara, I want to know about like your decision to leave the church. I mean, leave the church is one of those things. It's like I read an article called "Josh Harris and Apostasy," and I think that it's really fun when you use that word. It makes it sound like you did like an old timey crime. But yeah, that decision. I mean, you are also a public figure and. Like a Christian beauty queen who then
don't search too far on Google because you'll find old interviews that I did that I'm also like, I don't believe that anymore. So that also does exist. That exists.
Oh yeah, we've all got never ask us about our past unless it's a panel like this. But like I just want to know, when you made that decision to leave, were you like, was there any concern about what? I want to say your fans or your community, what they would actually think and what the impact would be on you personally because of the identity that you had rooted.
Yeah, I mean, faith. I left everything. I left my church community, and when you've grown up, and it's like your family. It's everything that you know. My whole identity was wrapped up in like daughter of the king, right? So. But you're laughing because you probably said that too, right? So it's like, yeah, I left everything. I all of the relationships, the friends, people just kind of started like fading. You get comments as you're like highlighting like, hey, like valid criticism of like, hey, church, maybe we should look at these like things that are going on socially that are like not okay. Like it's not really a safe place for a lot of people to exist in the church these days. And I would be talking about that on like my private Facebook or whatever. And people would be like, well, why are you not standing for unity, Tara? That would be the criticism I would always get. Right? And so you're like, but people are being hurt. People are being taken advantage of. And how are we not talking about, glass ceilings that we place on women, how it's like deeply traumatic to be a queer person in the church. Try not being white in the church. That's also really harmful a lot of the time too, as somebody who is like a multiracial human being, So it's like I started pointing out those things and I slowly started losing friends. I started losing speaking engagements. And I started just wrestling with this myself. I mean, like, I can't continue with this. And it's very disorientating, lonely often for people who go on that journey of leaving the church or deconstructing your faith. Of basically, I liken it to like dumping the Lego box all over the living room floor and like shifting through the pieces and trying to figure out, what do I still align with? What do I still feel like is true to my core values and my ethics and the person that I want to be in this world? And what is all this stuff that really just comes from a politicized agenda that the church has had that I can say I no longer want to be part of that? It's a really gut-wrenching journey to go on. And I see, heads nodding around the room because maybe you intimately know the isolation of how that feels or the pain and grief of what that feels like to go on that journey of taking your entire life apart and then at the end of it seeing what's left over and trying to put it back together again. And that's what it was like for me.
Yeah. Do you, like, both of you, this is an open question. Do you find that, since leaving the church, you still just have, like, your kind of your brainwashing kicks in sometimes and you have to fight with yourself? Because I find that sometimes I'll have a response to something and then be like, well, that's like a weird Christian response. It's probably wrong. And then, you think about it and you're like, oh yeah, it was wrong. I just wonder if, because I think people think that when you leave the church, like, it's gone, it's out of you. And sometimes it feels a little bit like, like an addiction you had where, you're done with it. But at the same time, like, you're kind of always fighting it. That's roughly the question. Do you ever find that exact thing happens?
I do. And I know when I work with clients, we'll peel back another layer and you're like, oh shit, look, that's there too. Right? Like, I thought I was good, but like, here's another thing. Or, you'll be like doing your grocery shopping at the superstore or whatever. And like some like worship song comes up on and you're like instantly triggered. I don't know, maybe just me.
I just started singing
okay,
along
you guys too. Yeah, that's a thing, right? And you're like, oh, still got some like wounding that I've got to heal, right? Every now and then that kind of thing happens, right? So like, yeah, it's a continual process of like, oh, got this to unlearn. Oh, got this to unlearn. Oh, that still hurts. Okay, I'm going to sit with and tend to that part, or that like that former version of me is sometimes really sad about something that she went through. There's still that layer of grief to tend to, or sometimes that former version of me is like shocked and appalled, like, wow, can't believe we're doing this, but here you are. That's sometimes a real thing too.
I'm often triggered by that song "Days of Elijah." Do you remember that song?
Oh wow!
Like, these are the days. Yeah, and it's because the bridge of that song.
That's gonna be stuck in my head now for the rest of the day. Thank you so much.
It's here, and that's why I had another question, but then I thought of "Days of Elijah," and I was like, well, I have to talk about this because it's the only thing in my head now. Yeah. But yeah, there's the part where they're like, "There's no God like Jehovah," and they do that a bunch of times. But then, like, my church could never get the rhythm right, like going back into the chorus, right? Yeah. And so like it was this really uncomfortable moment where you could feel it coming, and and the whole church would kind of cringe, like collectively, and then it would be just as bad as we all thought, and then we'd carry on with the song, but
we may all have trauma, but we're funny now, right? Yeah.
Trauma makes you funny. That's how you get funny. A question that I often get is, talking to people who did not grow up in church, is like, well, what did it for you? Like, what was the thing that finally convinced you? And I don't really like that question because, obviously when you have lived a whole life, you understand that it's, a lifetime of things that slowly convince you until eventually, the evidence is overwhelming. And even then, you don't necessarily say, I'm convinced. You just kind of like close your eyes for a while until you really can't do anything else. But so I have an answer. I'm going to tell you my answer, which is, I was adopted, and then my parents told me God built this family. The reason you're here is because God saw you in someone else's womb and scooped you up and put you over here. And so it was just so important to me for that to be true, because otherwise, and as I was growing up and realizing that like my adoptive family wasn't super nice to me, it seemed like, well, otherwise this was a really mean thing for someone to do. But if this was part of God's plan, then I just need to stay in it, and there will be a big payoff. There's the church joke pastors used to tell where they were like, there's two boys and one's an optimist and one's a pessimist, and they're like, you can give them both, what is it, like you give them both a bag of manure as a Christmas present, and so then the pessimist is like, oh, thanks for the manure, and then the optimist is like, oh, starts digging in the manure, like, oh, with all this manure there must be a horse in here somewhere.
Never heard that one.
It's a pastor joke. And a lot of traveling pastors told that one. Maybe it's just an Abbotsford joke. It's a regionalism. But that was me growing up, right? I just was like, okay, well, this is terrible, but there's got to be a huge payoff. God did this. And then in my early 20s, I met my biological mom, and I found out that, she was like a 16-year-old scared Black girl in foster care, and like a manipulative adoption agency roped her in and gave her 3 folders, and she picked one based on the information she'd been given. And so it just seemed like, oh yeah, God had no part in this, and that was mean to do to her too. And I think once my vision of God was actually just replaced by like the person who was absent in my life, just like, oh no, I come from my mom, I don't come from God at the end. I was able to look back at all the other evidence that had just always been screaming at me and staring me right in the face, and and start to let it go. Yeah. It's a long answer, but that's what happens when people ask me a question. So same question to you guys. Like, what was it in the end that made you decide, like, okay, no, I'm out? You know, because I feel like it's one thing, to fade away, and it's another thing to be like, absolutely not. Especially when you're already, you know, public personas with roots in that culture. And so I just think that like the decision to tear that out of the ground, I mean, something had to get you fired up. Like what was it?
Yeah, for me, you know, it's interesting. I feel like I'm trying to avoid like a reverse come to Jesus moment where it's like, I was this and now I'm this.
Yeah.
And this is my new camp and this is my new people and this is, you know, my new identity. I feel like I'm really still in process. So I don't even really like to think in terms of I'm an ex-evangelical or, you know, put a label on myself. I've been visiting a church, you know, off and on at different times. And it's not really a matter of belief for me. It's me trying to find ways to connect to community, to kind of try to understand different aspects of my own journey. And I think part of that's the uniqueness of this church, that, you know, the way that they're shaped and the way that they teach doesn't, you know, trigger me in the same ways that another context could. Right. But I think for me, the moment that, and part of the reason that I was public about it was because I had, growing up, I've just always had this sense of like, I don't want to say something publicly and then be doing something different privately. I wanted to have that integrity in my own life. And what was taking place behind the scenes is my marriage was falling apart and we were pursuing divorce. And I really knew that's what we needed to do, but it was against everything that I thought the Bible taught. And so I was like, wow, I must not believe in the same way if I'm pursuing this so, you know, in such a focused way. And then when we announced that, my ex-wife and I, we jointly shared that, there was this reaction of, oh my gosh, you know, this must be because they were basically blaming my ex-wife for it, as if there was something wrong with her, which is like so sadly typical. And she had been vocal about some of her questions of the evangelical church and those types of things. And so people were just pegging that on her. And it was a moment for me. I was just so upset by that. And also, I think at this place where I was like, I don't want to have to engage in this like defense of what I do and how I live. And I wanted to be able to affirm my gay friends, and I didn't want to have a theological debate about that. And so for me, it was this moment of like, guys, peace out. Don't even count me in. Don't expect me to try to go along with your rules and so on. And I think for me, I just needed to get out from underneath that pressure of people thinking I was this guy over here. Yeah. And creating all kinds of narratives, and I just wanted to escape it. But that doesn't mean that I have some kind of final clarity on all of these things. I think for me, I'm trying to be more compassionate towards all humans. I think we're all just messed up. We're constantly traumatizing each other. There's no perfect system. You know, if all the ex-Christians went and formed their own communities, we would screw each other up there. Like and that's very pessimistic. I'm definitely saying this is a bag of manure, but it's a pessimism that's trying to I think foster some compassion towards just all of us. And so I just think so many people are doing their best in a flawed way to try to find meaning, to try to find purpose, to try to find community. And Christians are just one group of people who have tried that and have in the process caused a lot of hurt and done a lot of harm, but they don't have a corner on that market, unfortunately.
That's true. Same question to you though. Yeah, like what did it in the end? Or when people ask you that question, what do you say?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that there's one specific thing. It definitely was like a continuous journey over time of like, hey, this doesn't line up. Hey, this doesn't line up. Hey, this doesn't line up. I was raised in the church, so I didn't choose this for myself. And I got to the point where I was like, well, my whole life I was taught that like, we love and accept everybody, but except for all of these people, but not if you're gay. And then I found out I was queer. And not if you're a woman, then you can't preach. And I was a preacher and like all of these things, right? Yes, but this, that. And I'm like, but okay, so not really. Okay, so we're not really welcoming of everybody. It's not really for like all people. Like I want to do more than just like watch the babies in the nursery and be a children's pastor or whatever, right? But that was it. I could be the children's pastor or I could be the pastor's wife, right? And like that was really, if you grew up in the church and were raised the way that I was and you believe this really passionately, that you're like, I'm going to dedicate my whole life to this, like that was your only option. So then I was like, oh, behind the curtain, this is kind of, from my perspective, a facade. Like this isn't really what we're actually after. There's all this agenda tied to this. Again, I still really love the person of Jesus Christ and the teachings that he had, but I realized the more that I dug into reading church history and theology and trying to like understand as much as I could like original texts, and no, I don't. So don't come at me thinking that I'm like, can speak Greek, because I can't. But like trying to learn from people who are much smarter than me, who knew this stuff, I was like, oh, what I was taught was not what was accurate, and therefore I'm out. Therefore I'm out, because the values that I always had that I think came from the good people I knew that were in the church, that were doing the best they could with what they had, were trying to teach us that we are going to be inclusive and we are going to love people, but then everything that the institution was teaching wasn't lining up to that, and so therefore I stepped away from the institution.
So like I'm really interested in like your Instagram. I was looking at it and just like there's so much about like unlearning purity culture and kind of like recovering your love for your body and reclaiming that sense of self. And the thing that blew me away was like, didn't you win Miss Canada? Like, aren't you? So it just seems like how would you explain to people, like I won the award for, I think, best woman in the world, but then still have, all these hangups.
Yeah.
And can you talk a little bit about that?
So here's the truest thing I know is, as somebody who works with people and their bodies and their relationships with their bodies all day long, I have not met a single person on the planet so far who doesn't have some kind of complex relationship with their body. Right? Yes. Every head in this room is nodding. We all have complex relationships with our bodies, no matter who we are. And I see that so much as the environment of what we're living in. Again, every institution around us has some kind of agenda for our bodies. Right? And that comes through very explicit ways and very subtle ways as well, too. So when you see that very lovely Instagram that has a lot of like pictures of me or my body or whatever it is me on that journey of reclamation, of learning to love my body again, learning that my body belongs to me, not the church, not my spouse, not my no, my body belongs to me. And she has so much wisdom to speak to me. She has so much that I can learn from. When I was taught to distrust my intuition, no, actually my intuition was like, run, right? Like they're trying to control you, right? And so being able to come back into relationship with that, I hope that the stuff that I'm putting out helps spark that in somebody else, that like, oh, actually, maybe I should sit with my body and listen to what my body is trying to communicate to me. Maybe when I feel that like really like conflicted tug of war in the pit of my stomach, maybe that's trying to tell me something. Maybe I shouldn't just learn to like submit to the authority of somebody else over me and not ask questions, but maybe I should ask a lot of questions. Maybe asking questions is going to actually help me find something that feels really truth, because truth feels like something in the body.
Mm-hmm. Josh, same question, actually. Like, I want to follow up with that. For me, a big part of leaving the church has been, this reclamation of my body and like this, there's this kind of just like growing self-love that I feel like probably began when I left the church. And I'm wondering if, because again, in your perspective, like I feel like I would be like, I would be trying not to feel guilty, right? And I don't mean that you should feel guilty. I mean, when you read my book, you'll see that like shame is my main emotion, right? So if I wrote I Kissed Dating Goodbye and unpublished it and like and got over like all that stuff and moved on, I'd still just wake up every day like, you're a piece of shit. And I want to know like how do you love yourself, right? Like, and I don't mean that in a mean way. Like I mean that in like, tell us, like how do you love yourself?
Well, I don't necessarily think I do it, perfectly. I think that in the same way that there have been, people who have their honesty has pierced me.
Yeah.
There are also people whose, honesty has been really healing. And so I think I feel very connected to the human dilemma.
Yeah.
We're all out there imperfectly trying to live our lives, and I happen to do that in a way that had a bigger impact because of book sales and the timing of things than other people. And so I have to live with that, and there's pain that comes with that. But I also, I've also received the forgiveness and the kindness and the compassion of a lot of people. And so that's been a huge part of just my own process of being able to say, okay, I'm going to get up and try again today.
Yeah. Do you feel like free? Because I feel like that was a big thing with church. They'd be like, oh yeah, we're all going to go to church and do the same thing and beg for freedom. And then, we'd sing about how we were free. And then we would wait until we were dismissed by the pastor. And, and we would go home feeling a lot of pressure to be back the next week at the same time.
Yeah.
So like, I wonder about, after everything you've been through, like, do you feel like so free? I feel like I would, because again, like I'm trying to just like I think about if I was in your shoes, like the pressure I would feel at times, and just like the weight of the world, like that I feel like I would feel it all the time. Yeah. And so I'm hoping that you feel free. Do you have moments where you feel free?
I think even the process of the moment in my story of coming to Vancouver was a huge part of that. It's part of the reason I love this city so much, because it really symbolizes for me a new chapter and new freedom to be able to admit you're wrong. There's a freedom that comes in that. And then, learn and build a new life. So it's very humbling. And it can be painful at times. I interact, someone will send me a DM, talking about how my book, damaged them in really significant ways. And that hurts. It always hurts. And I think one of the things that, like I have friends who say to me, like, stop saying you're sorry for this, like move on. And I am moving forward, and I don't spend all my time thinking about I Kissed Dating Goodbye or anything like that. But when I interact with someone who for the first time is communicating to me, the damage, I want to meet them where they are, and so I need to enter back into that. And that's just part of my, unique story.
Yeah.
So
are you ever going to tell that unique story in another book?
I don't know. I definitely think about it. I for obvious reasons, I'm very gun shy about writing. So, I don't know what that will look like. I'm not sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
I want to turn it over to the audience a little bit for a few questions. We're technically over time, but we started late, and I don't really care about time. So, like, if you need to go, like, you're welcome to go. But I'm having a lot of fun. That's the same for you. If you need to go, you're welcome to go.
I think Tara should do an altar call. Honestly, she was preaching.
Yeah. If anything that was said here today touched you, we're gonna be passing around a little velvet pouch.
Altar call.
And
sure.
Let's all just close our eyes and. Okay, actually, no. I want to talk about that. Let's get into the minutia. Tell me about your altar call experiences. I'm dead serious. So there's an altar call that happens in my book. There's a bunch of altar calls in my book, but there's one towards the end where I was really losing my faith, and I was like, I just needed God to show up in my life. And sometimes. Like at my church, it was one of these, it was like beyond Pentecostal, like you're just kind of like you're vibing with the Holy Spirit. And so, it felt like the Spirit was there, like there's sometimes that everybody's just kind of in the pocket, and so you're like, oh, the Spirit is here. And so I had my hands up, and I was just like, God, please, and I needed it. And then I started to feel myself kind of vibrating, and I was like, oh, like that's probably not like my deep 20-year unmet need. I'll bet that's Jesus. So, like I kind of let it happen, and then I was like, oh, here I go. Like I'm slain in the Spirit. And after 20 years, I was pretty used to someone catching me. Like that. There's like, when you start to wobble.
Nobody there for you?
There was nobody there for me. It was like,
man.
and it was one of those moments that I wrote in the book. Like, this is so on the nose, just like, and then I fell and no one was there for me. But that's what happened because nobody noticed, and I went backwards and I like hit my arm on. It was like one of those like the stacking chairs it's got like carpet, but then it also has the wooden arms. These ones, right? The church chairs,
for sure.
So like I hit the wooden arm and it just like broke right off because it was the oldest chair in the world, and and then like no one came over like, oh man, I see that you were slain in the Spirit so hard that you broke furniture. So
Oh my goodness.
anyway, that's one. The other times, like I also spoke in tongues. I got my baptism of the Holy Spirit. I'm interested in your altar call experiences because they're such it's a social moment, right? Like it's
right.
Especially now that we're no longer ascribing whatever a lot of those experiences to God. We're acknowledging that you're in a crowd and there's hype and there's and there's need. So I always found those moments really compelling, and I was always compelled to go forward and have like a public reconversion. So I'm interested in your relationship to the altar call.
Well, I was raised Baptist, so we don't do that.
Wow.
I remember one time I little me, maybe like 8, 7, put my hands up, and a lady gave me a look, and I was like, "Hey, we don't do that. Cool." So yeah, slain in the Spirit and speaking in tongues was not really part of our normal Sunday mornings. I saw it sometimes when I was brought into prayer meetings on a Tuesday night and raised to and taught how to pray over people, sure, yeah. But we were Baptist, Southern Baptist in Canada, which is the Canadian National Baptist. So whole lot of scandals happening there now. Yeah. But that was my experience. And when I started preaching after I became Miss Canada and was invited to preach everywhere, because they like the new shiny thing, right? I made a point of don't send the piano player on the back to when I'm in the last 5 minutes to do their super manipulative piano music. You guys know, right? It's I don't know. Do they all play the same song?
Yes,
I think they all play the same song.
It's the last song you did before you went into the kind of the free worship moment. Yeah. But then slower. Right.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Because I did feel it was very manipulative. And this is where the thing is I'm grateful that I had this inner knowing in my body the whole entire time that I was able to listen to, even though I was trying so hard. Thank you so much for coming. Bye, even though I was trying so hard to make it work, because I didn't want to leave the church. I didn't want to leave my family. I didn't want to leave my friends. I didn't want to leave the only world that I knew. So there was a deep inner knowing in my whole body the whole time of something's not quite right. But I tried, logically tried to make it work this whole entire time. But there were some things that I was no, it's off. There's something off about it. And so my altar calls weren't always the same like that. I had my own personal come to Jesus moments for sure. But like a good Baptist, they were personal and not in front of everybody.
How about you, Josh?
I went to become a part of a very charismatic church when I was about 17. And so I was exposed to the work of the Holy Spirit and being baptized in the Holy Spirit. So I had some very profound, very emotional, dramatic moments that honestly confused me a little bit when I look back on them, because I can explain them for the most part. to the pressure that's created. And I mean, you see this even in like concerts today.
Yeah.
There's something very powerful about music,
Sure.
and there's a deep longing, I think, that humans have for transcendence. But I definitely had some unique experiences that I don't completely understand.
Yeah, I tried to account for some of those in my book. When I was 6, I saw an angel, and I have this memory of seeing an angel. But as I went through my life, I was able to find I also have a memory of my mom explaining what I told her. That became the memory that I then had. And then, I have a memory of actually just having the need to see an angel right before I did, where a bunch of other kids had been were being praised for seeing an angel. And I was just standing there why didn't I get to see the angel?
Yeah.
And I think when I look back on a lot of these moments, I find that I was attributing to way outside what was way inside. So I think about, my angel sighting. There's a vision I had when I was 8. There's the day that I became baptized by the Holy Spirit. And it took a long time for me because I really truly was waiting for, this kind of bolt of lightning to just start me babbling. And then when I'd be being prayed for, they would be like, okay, well, you kind of have to, you gotta start,
Well, I think for me, I saw all of that misused and people really just chasing experience. And I think probably a lot of people in this room, if you come from a church background, part of your story is reactionary church switching based on, whoa, I don't really like that, so now I'm going to go over to this other church that's more balanced in this way. And it's kind of this brand battle among churches to get the perfect balance of theology and practice. And exactly.
Let's just change the flavor a bit. A second ago, I was going to open up questions to the audience, and then I instead asked you about altar calls. Are there any questions? I feel like somebody has a great question.
I'm really interested to know, are you guys religion, Christianity, completely gone, forget it, no way, nothing, or is there something that still holds on to you? Just something that you still believe in, or you still hold there, or is it just completely
Great question.
Oh, yeah. Let me just repeat the question for those maybe watching on the stream. Are you completely done? Are you all the way out with Christianity and God, or is there's still stuff you hold on to? And I know you were saying that the teachings of Jesus.
I like
something
the
there.
teachings of Jesus. I don't think Jesus died for our sins, and if you look back at early texts, I don't see that actually supported. I think that it was more a political agenda because he was very countercultural. He was bringing everybody in. He was saying oh no, you can directly speak to God and have this relationship, and the structure at the time was oh no, we can't do that. We can't have people decentralizing their faith, and we can't have, even from a Rome political side of occupation side of things, because they were occupying as another empire occupying Nazareth, right? They're no, we can't have people just everybody is now in the fold here. People who are on the fringes are now given power. No, we can't have the marginalized people have power. We need people to be oppressed to work with our agenda. And Jesus was flipping all that on his head. He was literally flipping tables because he didn't like people being taken advantage of by the powers that be, right? And so I like that part of Jesus, and I don't see the whole you have to get eternal life through Jesus only. And this is going to really make a lot of people uncomfortable. I'm so sorry. Maybe look at that. Look at why it makes you feel uncomfortable, and do your own reading and see where you end up. I have no agenda to convert anybody to how I think, but that's where I'm at these days. And I think that it's definitely when he says the kingdom of heaven is within you, it's a much more individual sort of thing. And that's where I'm at right now. It could change. I'm leaving the door open for these things to be fluid and maybe change in the future. But to your point of where am I right now, that's where I'm at right now. And I'm still very much in the love everybody, justly, love mercy, walk humbly. Oh, hell yeah, do those things for sure. That should take up our whole entire day. And that was my answer when I was Miss Canada. And people would be well, what do you think about the gays? I got that question all the time. Wish I knew I was queer at the time.
Yeah.
I would have given a different answer. But my answer was like, act justly, love mercy, walk humbly. And that's my whole day. Just doing those 3 things takes up my whole day. So I still stand on that part for sure.
I like to say that I fell in love with Jesus, but his father broke us up.
I get it. All right.
I haven't heard that, but I like that.
I'm all the way out. I'm just done. I don't believe in God. I believe that Jesus existed, I suppose, but like, you know, he's another revolutionary who was killed by his oppressors. There are lots. And the Bible is a book that has some really fun aphorisms in it. But that's about it. And I feel like whenever we talk about this sort of thing, there's this, like, well, I still believe in like loving your neighbor. Like, yeah. Like I'm not
like
evil
be a good person,
now, right? Like,
be a good person.
Yeah. Like I definitely am not like, all right, so like I'm throwing out everything, like every word that's in the Bible as well. So like love your neighbor. I'm not doing it. Like, thou shalt not steal. That is out. Now I'm a full-blown villain. I'm still, I feel like I treat people kindly because I want them to treat me kindly, and that's how I'm always going to be. And I think that I didn't need to read Love Your Neighbor in the Bible to figure out that life is a lot nicer and easier if you surround yourself with people that love you and are loved by you, So just out, and it's very freeing. People will ask, like, are you an atheist? Like, no. Like, I don't actually even have anything on the made up spectrum of religion. Like, I'm out. Like, the world is huge. There are all kinds of fascinating things about just everyday life. I don't even need the Israelite narrative to guide me. I'm a Black person, so I'm aware that life as an oppressed person is its own thing. So I mean, that's me. I don't know where you're at.
Yeah, I think for me, I kind of view Christianity almost like a first language or the country I'm from. I don't think I'll ever, it'll always be a part of who I am. It's, the story that shapes so much of the way that I interpret the world, even though I don't believe in the same way, and even though I don't practice in the same way. I do think it's probably always going to be a big part of how I connect with and communicate. So that's kind of my view right now.
Any other questions? Right there.
I'm curious, when you reach that place where you're like, no, this is not working for me.
Yeah.
And someone said it's a place of freedom because you're free from all these ideas and indoctrination that you want. Where did you look for resources? Because I think that could be a super terrifying place, especially as Tara said, we just had a Willie friends.
Yeah.
It's so essential.
Yeah.
So where did you look for resources?
Yeah.
I'm just going to repeat that as well. The question is, when you reach that place where you're done with the church, with religion, like, where did you look for resources? I do want to point out that this event is being hosted by the Vancouver Public Library.
Lots of resources.
Which has just a wealth of resources, including this incredible resource. This has just been the best panel. Do either of you guys want to answer that question?
Mine, like I said, was like this gradual shift, right? So first I was like, okay, I'm going to look at feminist theology, right? Because like that was one of my like first things. I was like, well, why can't women preach? I don't understand. This is silly. Like, I need a penis. Like, this is silly, right? And so first I started with that. I'm going to use proper anatomy. But first, I started with that, right? And I was like, okay, feminist theology and womanist theology, which is like Black feminist theology, right? And then I was like, why have I never ever like heard an Asian person preach aside from my father? Like, there's got to be other people out there who are like great Asian theologians. So I started like looking at and unraveling all those different things. I started looking at queer theology, and especially once I figured out like, oh yeah, I'm bi. So like queer theology, started looking at that. All those things exist. And I got to also the point of like, what outside? Like, as I started to deconstruct my faith even more, there's a lot of really great resources now for people who do identify as ex-evangelical. Like there's this whole, especially in the last like 2.5 years, if you know what's happened on the political stage, I don't think the pandemic has, like nobody has been unchanged by the events that have happened since 2020 to now. Everybody has changed in some way. And so a lot of people have started talking about this as we've seen what has happened, especially to the South, but very much in Canada as well too, as we've seen this like religious right move up that has always been there, but really become much more prominent over time. There's a lot of resources out there of people, whether they be authors, corners of the internet. Instagram has been really beautiful for finding an ex-evangelical community. There's great resources that do exist out there of people who are like, hey, there's maybe other ways of looking at this. And for me also too, like I went like I said, like back like really, really old. Like, what do they talk about in the Council of Nicaea? How did the canon like actually come to be? Like these things that I've been taught to believe my whole life, where did they come from? And who decided what it is that we're all supposed to believe and why? That was like the big question, why? If I talk about this with clients too, if you feel like there's supposed to be a box that you're supposed to fit into, question that. Because who built that box? Yeah. And who benefits from you living inside of that box? And that was where my journey really like took off, and then finding resources that answered those questions.
The great womanist poet Audre Lorde said, if we do not define ourselves for ourselves, we will be defined by others for their use and to our detriment.
Yeah.
I think about that all the time since I read it a year ago. And I think when I think about like where did I look for resources after I left, like everywhere and within, like it feels like leaving the church, it's just like taking this this giant dome off of your life. You just take it off, and suddenly you can see everything, and you can go everywhere, and I can investigate every idea that compels me, and rather than rejecting or denying what my body tells me, or thinking like I need a sign from God before I move. I had to become a lot more aware of what my body was saying and figure out ways to actually speak to myself and engage with myself.
Biggest resource.
Yeah.
Right here.
For me, the experience of being in the church was this like it was this constant assault on my body, and the point was to teach me not to trust it. And so what I found was as I realized I had to now, I started seeking out resources that were going to help make my body better, and the main one was therapy. I needed to speak to somebody and make sense of that. And then, it turns out like once you really start working on your mental health, it's transformative. It's just so transformative. You're like,
well, we don't just like pray and like Jesus makes it all better.
Oh, I know, and I was so used to that, just like prayer and then be like, well, I no answer again today, but maybe that's a maybe. So finding out that I can actually, I can access help for what's going on inside of me, that will do something, therapy, and then books and reading like every book, because growing up for me, there were all these books that were bad, right? It's like, well, you can't read this, you can't read that. I figured out about evolution when I was about 18, because I was in the chapters in Langley, the one by the Trinity, where it's the only place to go. Yep. And the book was called Why Evolution is Real. And I opened it up and read like 4 pages and was like, it's real. Like that's the end of that. So, I find that once you step outside of that bubble, the resources are literally everywhere.
Yeah.
And it's amazing how much world we've kept away from ourselves, in order to preserve our space in like a stifling subculture.
Yeah.
Do you have a response to that question?
Yeah, I was just going to say there's not just one way to go about it. So be specific to what you're going through. It doesn't have to be a big apologetic process where you have to prove why you're doing something to a bunch of other people. It might be more the somatic work with your body. It might be more pursuing the activities that really bring you joy in life. It might be more about the community you pursue. So I just try to always communicate people. There's not this rule of here's how you deconstruct and here's what you have to do and here's what you have to read. It's so unique to you, and being guided by what is it that I want, or what is it that I want to focus on healing, or what do I want to explore? It'll look different for each person.
Yeah, and like I find that like for me, leaving the church was like moving a house plant from the corner to the windowsill. You know, where just suddenly like there's growth in every direction, and there's a lot to tend to, and there's like so you just kind of you see where you're growing, and then you figure out ways to foster that growth. Yeah, okay. Any other questions?
Can I just add one more thing to that, and then we're going to get to, I know there's a couple here, but one thing I will say, when you are looking for those resources, notice if you're looking for an authority to tell you what's true and what's not.
Oh, yeah.
Because those of us who grew up in the church have been socialized that way. Yeah. Right? We've had somebody over us our whole lives, or our whole time in the church at least, telling us what is right, what is the right way. Right? And so I think it's really, really important for you, again, to like, this is your biggest resource right here, and focus on cultivating that inner knowing with your body. And that only comes through relationship. People ask me all the time, like, well, how do I know the voice of trauma in my body or the voice of anxiety in my body? Because that feels like it comes up all the time. And I don't know what is that voice of wisdom. What is truly that deep inner knowing that you're talking about? And so if I can give you just a little like helpful metric for that, is that when you feel in your body this like anxious, like, oh my God, I got to do this right now, that's probably a trauma response.
What?
Right? That's probably anxiety. When you're feeling this urgency of like, oh, I got to do this, or else, and then this will happen, and then this, and then, right? Do you know that feeling that I'm talking about?
Yes.
That's that feeling that you're like, okay, I'm going to acknowledge you over here. I'm going to acknowledge this feeling. I'm going to tend to you. You feel scared. Okay, cool. Thank you for telling me that you feel scared. And then sit with it a little longer and notice if it shifts. And that feeling that you're really looking for is that quiet, deep inner knowing that it doesn't matter. It's going to be there for you whether you jump now, whether you jump 10 days later, whatever. That deep inner knowing that like, this is what's true. Follow that feeling and follow your curiosity. Notice what happens when you just look at it with curiosity. If we look at something with like judgment, we're like, ugh, what is that? Whether it be like shame that pops up or like a new way of thinking. We open up a new book, Is Evolution Real? Ugh, what is that, right? It shuts down the conversation immediately.
That's true.
If you are just to look at it with curiosity and openness and go, what's that? It's amazing where that journey could potentially lead you.
That's good.
Any other questions?
There's one here.
Yes.
Did any one of you three entertain the idea of remaining within, but being a person who asks all the uncomfortable questions and stirring the manure?
Yes. Again, to repeat, did any one of you entertain the idea of remaining within, but then asking all the uncomfortable questions and stirring the pot?
Kind of like calling for transformation
Yeah.
and reform within the church.
Yeah, as an abolitionist in pretty much every situation, I just don't like reform. Never works. We. Come on, like we'll be like, okay, like we're all just going to be nicer to the LGBTQ community, and like, no, you're not. Like, the belief system hates you guys. Like, it's just one of those things where like we think we can fix it. We'll just take this out, or it's like, no, like this is broken entirely, and it has to go. And if I can't get it to go from the world, it's gone from my house at least. So yeah, for me, there was never a question of sticking around. I don't think that there's anything to save.
I tried for a real long time. I tried for a really, really, really long time. If you go deep enough in the internet, you can probably find still like, whether it be like podcasts or old blog posts or like even like my social media, you'll find me being like, okay, Christians, let's go. Like, this is not okay. We got to figure this out. Like, come on, guys. Like, this is not cool. The racism's not cool. The like homophobia is not cool. The misogyny is not cool. Like, come on. Like, and we're not even touching like scandals and abuse yet, right? Like, there's a lot that's not okay that we got to get in check. And I felt like, I'm talking to my people. So like, this is my community. Like I'm going to speak to, like, I'm one of you. Come on, guys. And I really did, like I said, I didn't want to leave the church because I felt like my values were in line with what I had at least been taught in Sunday school. And then I realized that like a lot of it was a sham because they didn't want to change. No matter how many times that you gave them resources, where you tried to, like, at least the section of the church that I was in had no desire, none whatsoever. And so at some point you're like, oh, this isn't just like a couple lessons that need to be learned. You're right. Like, no, they don't want to change. And it is like, the more that you look back in church history, you're like, no, structurally it's rotten. And we're taught in that Bible lesson of like, if you look at the fruit of the tree, and is it good? And I'm like, no, the whole thing is rotten. It's all rotten, like right down to the roots. Mm-hmm. So like, no, thank you. No, thank you. No, I'm done.
I'm reminded of that story of Jesus and the fig tree, where he goes to get a fig, but then there are no figs. So he curses the fig tree and the fig tree withers. And that's just a mean thing to do to a fig tree. Like, It doesn't even tell us what season it was. But that's about how I feel about the church. Just like, no figs.
Yeah.
I give no figs. I should have done.
I give no figs.
Do you have? Did you consider that?
I think for me, I was just so exhausted, and the environment that I was in,
valid.
I just wasn't at the place where I could do it. But I have so much respect for people who have that sense of calling, and that's where I just think it's so important to recognize they're just different people with different gifts and different moments. And I try not to throw stones, at anybody. There have been some really, I think, powerful examples of people doing that, but it's a hard road for sure to walk. And I'm not just saying that about Christianity. It could be any other religion. It could be some form of government, whatever it might be. But I do think there are examples in history and other places where that reforming spirit does make a difference, whether or not it actually sticks. But
well, I mean, we could talk about Martin Luther, I suppose. Like, he got a lot of traction with his whole thing, but I didn't like it. Okay, do we maybe time for one more? Yeah, right here.
Thanks, first of all, for being here. I wanted to ask if you'd be comfortable speaking a bit about what your relationships with your families were like as you went through this transition process away from the church. So I mean, like your parents, your spouses, your kids, your siblings.
I'm comfortable speaking about it because I wrote a book about it. So I'll jump in and answer, and if you guys want to, you can, and if you don't, you don't have to. But it's funny, like my family and I, we have not spoken since my book came out, and I'm in this fun space here where I typically hear from my mom like a week before Christmas, so that she can do like a weird drive-by gift drop-off. Like, she doesn't want to stay, but she's bought a lot of gifts. It's really interesting. So, I'm pretty sure this is the year that doesn't happen. And that will be the end of the relationship. Like, I'm pretty sure that's what's happening this month, but I don't know, and we'll see how that goes. But I mean, for me, this book was, I think, probably the functional end of most of that. When we did talk, we talked a lot about like adoption and Blackness, and almost never about, my faith. I always wanted to be, exactly the kind of Christian my mom imagined existed. But when I realized that person was white, and that I could not be that person, it just seemed like I don't really think I want to talk to her about this anymore. So I assume that they're very annoyed with my public stance on most things these days. I know that leaving the church for me was it was hard on my marriage. I'm pretty sure we're all divorced. I think these things are hard on all of our marriages. And so it was it was a lot. But I found I did a lot of this privately, and that most people didn't bother to confront me about the change in my beliefs. But yeah, it did cause some real problems.
Yeah, I had the benefit of moving to another country and the other side of the continent when I went through a lot of these changes. So I wasn't constantly running into people who were, angry or judging me. I know others who have, they changed, but they're still in the same community. That's very difficult. That's really a tough place to be. In terms of my family, I've got 3, I say adult kids. My youngest is 16, 20, and 22. And they were kind of walking through their own process of questioning and changing at the same time. And so I feel like our family unit, and include my ex-wife in that, kind of shifted at the same time. I know other people who, I have a friend in Oregon. She went through a divorce and she raised her kids to be very good, evangelical, judgmental, self-righteous kids. And when she then got a divorce, they judged the hell out of her, and that was a really painful experience for her. My extended family has been so gracious and kind, all my siblings. And my dad, my mom passed away about 10 years ago. I often wonder what that would have been like if she was still around. But my dad has, expressed his hope that I will return to the Lord and his disappointment in different ways. But for the most part, I would just say he's been incredibly kind and gracious and loving. And I'm really appreciative of that. Yeah.
I'm going to decline to answer because the story is not entirely mine to tell. What I will say is I have all the compassion in the world for people who are navigating it because it's not easy. It's so hard. It's so painful. And it's one thing for us to leave the church, and that's hard enough as it is, and it cuts so deep when you're going through that journey. And then when your family is wrapped up in it too, all the compassion in the world. So if you're feeling that way, you're not alone in the complexity of those feelings, the grief or the isolation. It's so real, and you're validated in feeling however it is that you feel in that complexity. And so I hold all the space for you for that, because I've been through it in varying degrees. And sometimes you get to a point where, somebody asks, like, did you try to make it work? Yeah, we tried to make it work. And sometimes that applies not just to the church, but to your family or your friends or your marriage or whatever it is. And so however that looks for you, I really feel that. And sometimes your body tells you have to leave. And so wherever you're at in the journey, I hold all the compassion.
Okay, so we're going to wrap up here, but do you guys have maybe a resource that you would recommend to somebody who is going through this journey right now, is navigating this time? I'm obviously going to recommend my own book. So I'm hoping that we can diversify or all agree to recommend my book.
I mean, I do go through a lot of it. My book coming out in May of this year, May 16th, right in the middle of AAPI month. So I'm very excited about that. But it is...
And what's it called again?
Your Body is a Revolution, Healing Your Relationship with Yourself, Each Other, and the Earth. And so that is coming out May 16th. Super excited for that. Pre-orders are actually already available, so you can go up if you would like and get that. And it will just show up at your house. So great. I also do one-on-one coaching. So, not that you need somebody to tell you where to go. And I, as a coach, never do, because that's not my role. My role isn't to tell anybody how to think or where to be or anything like that. My job is to help you learn how to listen to your body and follow your body's guides, and sometimes act as a translator for your body. Like, hey, did you notice that this is what you did and this is what I heard you actually say? And they're like, oh, I said that? Yeah, you said that. Right? Sometimes it's really helpful just to have somebody along with you in the journey. So if that's helpful for you, I would be so honored to witness your journey and transformation. But again, your biggest resource, aside from books or aside from coaching or whoever you want to talk to or listen to, it's helpful to hear other stories. Like, I hope today was really gave you hope. I hope today, this time that we've spent together this morning, feels like you're a little bit less alone. And I hope that it does point you back to that inner knowing within your body. I hope that you find that, hey, I can find the answers for myself. Maybe I need to sit with the uncomfortable things that come up. Maybe I need to sit with my anger, with my resentment, with my grief, with my pain. And I hope that you feel safe enough in order to do that, because that's the realm where we can work within, is safe enough.
That's great. Two books I'd recommend if you're still kind of in the Christian framework. There's a book called Falling Upward by Richard Rohr that I found really helpful, and he kind of talks about the two halves of life, the second half of life, and how oftentimes the things that work for us when we're young and we're zealous and we want identity don't work for us in the second half of life. So it's not a book that requires that you walk away from faith, but it's super helpful. And then another one is called Living an Examined Life by James Hollis. And it's just another one. The subtitle is Wisdom for the Second Half of the Journey. So I know several people up here are definitely not in the second half of their journey, but it's never too early to start thinking about kind of the second half of your life and how you've structured things. And I think both those books help you do that. And besides these two incredible books.
If you want a female author in addition, Richard Rohr is so great. If you want a female author in addition, Out of Sorts by Sarah Bessey is another one that's kind of like, what do I do when like the ground beneath me is shifting? And that one's also great.
Awesome.
Sweet. And yeah, again, you should buy my book. I have 2 copies left. And I should have brought more. That's the end of this panel. You guys, thank you so much for being here. Thank you guys so much for being here. Really, truly.